You are now saying they could be the next weak point of the global economy.
The emerging market story is by no means over.
China is slipping into the Japan-style lost decade, or the zombie banks, zombie companies.
Well, everything's possible, but this is completely unnecessary.
那么接下来我要采访花旗集团首席经济学家威廉·比特。那我们知道，如果用一个字儿来形容今天的全球经济的话，那么可能就是一个乱界。那我们看，像美国经济已经在复苏，那么欧洲央行和欧洲的这个决策机构呢，也出台了各种政策，那么它的复苏呢也开始起步。而中国经济和其他新兴市场呢，也各有各自的问题。那我们知道，比特他本人呢是荷兰人，那么他来担任花旗的首席经济学家，其实在花旗历史上并不多见。那么这个时候呢，我觉得他对于美国和欧洲的经济应当是比较理解的，而且他对中国的风险究竟怎么看，还值得我们来听一听。
上半年以来，美国经济波动显著减小，道指持续升高，欧元区出台欧版量宽，缓慢复苏进程变得稳定可期。反倒是新兴市场不再是铁板一块，全球经济走势出现新的分化。
What's the global economy headed for right now?
We have a continued modest recovery at about a 3% rate this year, real growth, and something slightly higher for the next couple of years. And that is made up out of a slightly improving advanced economy performance and a slightly weakening EM performance. But emerging markets will still account for more than 60% of global growth for the rest of this decade. Interest rates are finally looking as though they might go up in at least some of the Western countries. We expect the United Kingdom to raise rates first by the end of the year, and then the US, the Fed, to follow finally in the second half of next year. So normalization is the central scenario.
So you are saying that EM is still accounting for 60%. So you are now saying they could be the next weak point of the global economy.
No, there are no. In the EM universe, it's a very heterogeneous collection of countries. Some are doing badly. Russia, Brazil not doing too well. Some are doing pretty good. China still, despite the slowdown that's been registered, is still growing at a rate that the rest of the world would die for. India likely to do somewhat better than expected. Mexico up. So no, emerging markets, yes, there are vulnerabilities, but there's also great strengths. And the emerging market story is by no means over. And I think in some ways, it's really only about to begin.
In the past, we see, say, like internet bubbles, we see housing, we see finance. What would be the next, say, like growth point or the potential, driver for the global economy, you think?
Well, the next driver is always something that you don't expect. Well, it's clearly, I hope, going to be focused in the countries that, in our view, have the best potential for the next decade. I anticipate good things coming from both India and from Latin America. I expect China to make its transition to a more balanced growth model and to continue to grow at 5 to 6% growth rates starting next decade for the next 2 decades. So a successful transition to a more sustainable growth path. I think environmentally friendly commodities, goods, services, activities, forms of energy are going to be very big in the years to come. And there'll be other disruptive technologies, no doubt.
作为新兴市场引擎的中国，今年以来一度宏观经济指标横亘在警戒线以下。最近这一势头得到缓解，但楼市、股市依然没有破局，加之债务危机脚步临近，中国经济的风险并未走远。
I think you are a little bit, at least a bit optimistic about the Chinese economy, but actually people here are more pessimistic. And some are saying that actually China is slipping into the Japan-style, lost decade, or the zombie banks, zombie companies, and things. Do you think that could be a likelihood there?
Well, everything's possible, but this is completely unnecessary and in my view highly unlikely. It is true that China has a credit bubble, right? And it has overly expanded, especially corporate credit and indirectly local government credit since 2008 as part of the fiscal stimuli that were provided to keep the economy from falling into recession. And this has never been corrected, and credit is still growing way too fast. And every credit bubble in the end bursts. The question is, who will bear the losses, and will there be damage to systemically important financial institutions? My answer is yes, there will be losses, but the government, the central government, has the resources to prevent any systemically important financial institution from falling over. So I'm not saying that everybody's going to get their money back, but there is no systemic risk from a financial crisis. The other risk I see in China is the housing boom. Right? That is likely, in my view, unless a miracle happens, to lead to a sharp contraction when the commercial side of residential housing construction goes into a sharp downturn because of a steep fall in house prices. That is, nothing is inevitable in economics. It's not physics, but I've never seen a housing boom of the magnitude of China's that did not end in tears.
Mm-hmm. So you are saying every bubble has to go bust. Is there a way that you can prolong this bubble, or diffuse? You
can blow on the balloon, right, and make a bigger bubble, right, and have a bigger bust. You cannot do this indefinitely, and so the authorities have to decide. Well, for credit bubbles, they can keep it going. For a housing boom, no. If markets, the private participants, lose faith, right, in the ability to sell the houses they've acquired at a profit, then they will sell. And unless the governments end up buying houses directly, which I don't see them doing on a large scale, they cannot prevent a fall in house prices. But this need not have catastrophic consequences. A 20% or so decline in house prices in a year should be easily managed by Chinese households, not necessarily by the developers and the construction companies and the realtors. They will take losses, and there may be some bankruptcies, but the banks also, I think, if necessary, with government assistance, will survive this housing market correction, which is overdue.
What else should the government and the authorities do to prepare for a scenario like?
Well, clearly, China needs a lot of housing and construction. The problem is that the kind of housing that there is an excess of, right, has to go down, while at the same time, the kind of housing that is needed, social housing, housing for new rural urban migrants, housing for people that are getting their hukou in the tier 1 and tier 2 cities. Now, all these, they need more of that. So this government has to try and ensure that there is a smooth flow of resources out of the contracting sort of AAA luxury, privately funded apartments to the social housing segment of the market, and the infrastructure that supports social housing and urbanization. So but not the kind of broad range traditional stimulus. Any kind of infrastructure will do. Let's send money to state-owned enterprises, and the stimulus should be targeted at the viable sectors, and it should also be focused on the household sector directly through fiscal instruments rather than on investment alone.
中国经济在前进，希望系于改革。18届三中全会描绘的宏伟蓝图，需要在细节上逐一实现。纵观当前形势，经济改革在财税、金融领域微观突击，社会和政治改革在更广大的图景中展开。这其中有哪些主线需要遵循？推动改革又要如何制造协同效应？
Here and outside China, some people say that after the crisis, China's economic structure is transitioning, is rebalancing. But others are saying that they are disappointed after the third plenum, meeting. There have been 5-6 months already passed. No big move in the reform agenda. What's your view on this?
No, it's true that while the proposals, the reform plans in the third plenum were remarkable, very little has been done in terms of actual implementation or even detailed formulation of plans. Now, 6 months is a short time in the history of China, right? So we should not be too impatient, but I would like them to get on with it, because the old growth model, export-driven, heavy lifting investment-driven, environmentally damaging investment-driven, commodity-intensive, energy-intensive, driven investment is no longer viable. It has to be domestic demand-driven, investment in the service sector-driven, household consumption-driven, services-driven. That's what is needed. Of course, it requires supporting reforms like FDI in the service sector, removing the state-owned enterprise monopoly of different sectors, privatizing state-owned enterprises. All that, I would like to see at least a start made, and we have seen so far rather little, except the opening up of a few, enterprise zones, Shanghai, etc. So one would hope for
that
more.
one is not very clear right now. I mean,
It will get there, but all these things, the devil is in the detail. You can talk reform from the top, but it has to trickle all the way down to the managers on the shop floor who have to implement the details, the bureaucrats in the central government ministries, the provincial and the local authorities. You cannot reform only from the top.
我觉得 Peter 刚才所说的呢，他对于全球经济和中国的看法相对来说还是比较乐观的。那么第一，他认为中国经济呢，其实即使是5%、6%的这样的一个增长呢，那么实际上呢还会对全球有非常大的这个正面的意义，而且他也认为中国经济是不会崩盘的。那么另外一点呢，他认为这个信用的泡沫呢，可能还可以继续维持下去，但一大风险点其实在于房地产的这个泡沫。那么他认为中国房地产最大的问题呢，可能并不是总量上的，而是结构上的。那么第三一点呢，其实他就是说关于中国改革和这个结构转型的问题。那么他也说，从这个一个外国人的角度来看呢，那么从去年的这个3中全会到今天已经有半年了，那么具体的一些改革的方案呢还没有面世，那么一些比较大的动作呢，现在也看到的比较少。那么这一块呢，相对来说他还是比较焦虑的。